Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, the reunion, season 5. Let's check it out.
Yeah, a week or less after me and Stacy didn't work out, we ended up being at the same bar. A bunch of the cast was out, and so I saw her, and we sat there and talked for like an hour and tried to see if there was anything there, kind of give it a shot, but I think...
Okay, so we're hearing that they, or at least he did, he tried to see if maybe, and that would be the logical thing. And I'm glad they considered it, honestly.
Like, we ran into each other at the bar. He came out to a bar like once. We tried to kind of hang out, and it was pretty clear it was still the same pattern.
I don't know
it
if like when people nowadays say we tried to hang out, did you guys kiss?
Yes, we did. We did, that's all it was. We never hooked up or anything.
You did what?
We kissed.
Okay. Yeah, it was a good question that she asked, because I didn't even think of that. The way they were talking about it, they just hung out at the bar, they had an hour conversation, and that was that. But it was more than that. But, you know, it's fine, but okay. All right.
But we never hooked up. It was never...
Wait, what is hooking up these days? Like full sex?
Like, let's fucking go.
Okay.
Educate the old people.
No, we never had any sexual relations.
No, so
You guys made out.
I never.
They're getting into the nitty gritty, but, you know, those are the questions that I think people would want to ask. Pretty bluntly asked, but, you know, it's fine. And we're all adults. We can have these conversations. And certainly Izzy and Johnie could be, I don't want to go into it. But they're saying that they did not have sex. Okay.
Hold on a second. You guys were making out, and you were actually at the same bar at the same time?
Yeah, with her girlfriend, with his girlfriend.
Yeah, I was there.
Wait, you guys, I'm so sorry.
Wait, so they're making out in the bar? Okay. I mean, yeah. All right.
After that time, like they were already done. So that was already like done. This was after her and Chris already.
So you weren't making out at the bar. You guys left the bar. Or were you at the bar?
We made out in his Jeep. We never hooked up.
Yeah.
That's the end of it.
Hooking up nowadays means sex.
Stacy, did you know about any of this happening? You did.
I feel like most people know that hooking up means sex, right? I certainly didn't mean that back in the day, but I just always figure the hosts are hipper than me, at least.
It's like a huge city, but somehow it seems
so
very, very
small.
small right now.
I disagree.
How did you
I have
find
very good friends that tell me things. And at that point, he's single. He can do whatever he wants to do. I was surprised because of what he had told me about her, and it didn't seem like you spoke fairly highly of her.
Yeah, that is, I think that lends itself to what I was thinking, that he either doesn't know who he is or he's the deceitful one, actually. That when he's around Stacy, he goes after Johnie, but when Stacy's not around, then he's saying something different to Johnie, that he's apologized. You know, we imagine the tone of the conversation that night, the way that Johnie was saying. She's like, oh, he apologized. So if you really believe, if you believe in the truth that you said earlier, Izzy, all the things that you were saying, that she's shady as fuck, what was it? Right? Wasn't that it? No, sketchy as fuck. If you believe that, because nothing happened after the barbecue that would have rectified the situation necessarily, and you clearly still, at least your rhetoric, you still hold that she has the premise of being, she has the underlying reasons for calling someone sketchy as fuck. Because, you know, he's saying my truth, I stand by. I should have not worded it that way. But the content of what I was saying, I still believe, which is that you are deceitful. You are sketchy as fuck. I just sort of said it in a less aggressive way. And yet you made out with her and you tried to get with her. What's the deal there? Now, it wouldn't be the first time something like that happened, but it just points in the direction of, well, what does it point in the direction? I think it points in the direction of he's trying to impress Stacy still, which, okay, that would make sense. He's potentially still in love with her. It sounds like it, you know, the love feeling lasted a long time and it took a while to get over Stacy, and wouldn't be unusual to still be getting over her, especially sitting right next to her. It's possible they haven't seen each other really in a year and a half-ish. So, and then let's use it as a jumping off point to talk about protective identification. So, in a nutshell, I've talked about it before, but we internalize relationships, we internalize a vision, a perception of the other, and a perception of the self, and these become somewhat, especially over time, if it's a chronic type of interaction with someone, it tends to solidify in our personality to some extent. For example, if this is just making up stories. If Izzy had someone in his life that was deceitful, saying one thing but doing another, and betraying him and being wrong, well, that's interesting. So you wonder what happened to him in his religion. You could imagine a lot of scenarios like that. Maybe even as he's trying to extract himself, because it sounds like he has gotten out, and that yelling at him about he's deceitful and he's two-faced and that sort of thing. You can imagine that trauma. Who knows? I'm just making up stories. Or it could have been something more mundane, like he had a parent that was abusing alcohol and would sneak away to drink, and so there would be these broken promises. There's just a lot of possibilities of betrayal, unfortunately, that kids can go through. And so he, just making up stories, he has someone that is that way, two-faced and deceitful. He's experiencing it, and he's the victim of it as a child. He internalizes that dyad, and then he recreates it. I'm skipping a lot of steps here, but essentially we recreate those in adult life for a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons is because we're trying to correct for the past. We have unfinished business. This internalized object relation is actually giving us a lot of pain, and it's not comfortable. It is cropping up in ways. It's telling us we're not worth it, or we might even be motivated to betray other people. But it feels more satisfying somehow to recreate the relationships as an adult. We do this all the time. And so if he did have that internalization, that introject, if you will, and for those of you that are typing in the comment section, the term is introject, like introduction. It's like not interject. I might say it like interject, but it's introject, just to let you know about the term. But anyway, so then he recreates it by finding someone that it allows him to use the defense mechanism of projection and projective identification by having someone that he believes actually will be able to project one side or the other. That's how we do it. We don't necessarily project the other onto the other. We might actually identify with the other and project the self. Sometimes we're doing this both at the same time, which is actually kind of potentially what was happening here, that he found Johnie as someone that would be easily projected upon. And projection in the defense mechanism sense and in the psychoanalytic sense is not the way people use it colloquially. People will use projection colloquially to impose like a feeling, like you are angry and you're like claiming everyone else is angry. And so people say that's a projection. Technically, in the psychoanalytic sense, that's not a projection. That's just a distortion. We don't really have a word for that in psychoanalysis, but the technical definition is by projecting a part of the self that you're denying. And when you have those interactions with the other person as they are being deceitful and betraying, they become a part of the self. And as the self, you start to actually emulate that for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into. But you don't like that about yourself, and you hate that about yourself because it's shameful, but also because you know what it's like to be betrayed and to have someone be deceitful and two-faced. And now you're being that way, and you cannot acknowledge that because that's too painful. And so you find someone that is easily projected onto. Sometimes you'll find someone that actually does these things, or if you can't find someone that does those things to project onto, then you will force it either through just distorting what they're doing as being deceitful and two-faced, or you'll socialize them, manipulate them subconsciously to you and to them to actually do that to you. And so you could argue, I guess, if we're going down this road, that the way he reacted to Johnie when Johnie was talking about her history with her past partners and her past partner suffering from addiction, that Izzy was not very clear or helpful to Johnie, which could have messed her up a little bit. That could have been some of that subconscious socializing of Johnie. It doesn't really fit exactly as I say it out loud. But anyway, the point is that it's possible that a lot of his anger and the amount of focusing that he had on Johnie, and it's possible also that this internalization involves some sort of triangle, like there was, I'm just making up stories, like dad was the deceitful one, and him and his mom were bonding. He wanted love and attention from his mom, and they could kind of triangulate against dad that was being two-faced. Again, I'm just making up stories. And because it wasn't just that recreation, it seemed to somehow also involve Stacy, which is often the case. Triangles can be internalized as well. But anyway, so he finds Johnie, he sees everything that she did through that lens and cannot let go of that because he needs to externalize that part of himself that he internalized from his childhood that he has to deny in the self. And then he identifies as the victim. But now that he's an adult, he's going to fight back. And that's the part of it that is why we recreate it, because when we're children and we're being betrayed, we don't have power to do anything. But now, subconsciously, we know we do have the power, so we can actually recreate it. And this time, I'm going to have the power that I wish I had when I was young. But the problem is that if you're not aware of this process and you don't have your stuff at least somewhat conscious and you haven't healed from it sufficiently, you're just going to recreate it subconsciously and you're going to think conscious thoughts. But really what's happening is this whole sea of difficulty that's of your history and your relational traumas going on underneath that you're not aware of, while also treating other people in a poor manner. You're actually doing the same thing that someone did to you, and you're treating other people. You think you're actually fighting the good fight, but in actuality, you are the problem. You are the asshole, if you will. But it's all out of your awareness because it feels so right. That's the thing about projective identification, is that it feels so satisfying in the moment. But when you zoom out, you're like, what is, and so becoming aware of it and also healing from it and having corrective experiences is the way out of it. And these things will play it themselves out in therapy with therapists. A lot of projective identification occurs between the relationship between therapist and client. So therapist has to be pretty aware of their own countertransference, because that often will illuminate the clients in the inducement that they're trying to recreate. They're trying to subconsciously, for example, if I just go with this story, which I don't know if it's even near the mark, if I treated someone like this, then I would start to have impulses to do things that actually subconsciously would be betraying and two-faced to the client. I wouldn't identify that in my mind, but I would be having motivations that would lead the client to believe that I was being two-faced. They would have reasons to believe that because they're trying to recreate it with me. And of course, I come to the table with all my interjects, right, and all my internalizations. That's why therapists have to go through a lot of work themselves. So, because I can actually use, and I do all the time, whether I know it or not, I use projective identification with my own clients, and I use it with the cast members because I can't help it. So it's a matter of awareness. It's not a matter of getting rid of it. And then, of course, all of you and all the viewers of this show, in fact, I think a huge reason why people love reality TV is because it's so easy, especially if you have an ensemble cast, for the viewers to find someone to recreate a past relationship with subconsciously, because it's so much more satisfying. It feels so much better if it's external. You know, what I'm saying is that with Izzy, he actually might have actually been the two-faced person. That to Stacy, he was saying one thing, and to Johnie, he was saying something else. It's a bit of a stretch because it spanned a lot of months. You know, it's all condensed in our heads because it's just happening this week. But for him, it was over 18 months. But especially given what we're hearing here, right, that because, you know, during the shooting of the show, we could say, well, he was triggered. He was in that moment. And then 6 months later, he meets up with Johnie. Somehow those things go away. Maybe he processed them, or they faded with time, or he heard things from Johnie that helped him to realign his thoughts. He changed his mind. He became much more, he became attracted to her, to Johnie, and really might have wanted to be with her. So you think, okay, well, that change is, that happens, and you would almost expect or hope that to happen. But then a year later at the reunion, somehow he's right back. I mean, he's not as bad, but the way he talked, it was still in that zone. It was just like, I stand by my truth, and I don't regret a single thing that the point that I was making. So how does that happen? Did something happen in the past year that returned him to this way of thinking? And as they talk about their dating, he's kind of giggling like it was this fun experience. So who's the two-faced person? Who's the deceptive person? Who's lying, or who is manipulating, right? Now, I don't think he's on some mission to manipulate, but if he did internalize this, he would be subconsciously reenacting it without him knowing about it. It would feel like everyone else is the betrayer and the two-faced person, when in fact it might actually be him.
Mm-hmm. But after your guys' breakup.
Yeah.
Izzy, I'm curious, not to call you out on this, but
Call me out. Let's go. I'm here for
at
it.
the party, you defended your actions that night by calling Chris a great friend and you had his back and all this stuff. And then it seems like very shortly thereafter, you're making out with his very recent ex-girlfriend. So I'm curious how you...
Well, that's not the question I would ask. I would ask a question in line with what I was saying. That's just me. Because this one isn't as... I guess you could add that to the two-facedness, I suppose, but that one doesn't... I mean, I don't know what he's going to say, but, you know, he had Chris's back, and Chris left Johnie, and it's 6 months later, and I don't think Chris... In fact, I'm guessing Chris would have been happy to see Johnie exploring her options.
Defend that, reconcile that, explain that.
I mean, Chris and Johnny's business was Chris and Johnny's. I don't know if you were upset with me for that or not.
No.
Yeah, I didn't think you were, but if I did, I'm sorry.
I mean, it is painful seeing that, but...
Yeah, they were sort of alluding to that Chris saw it, and then that's when I was like, wait, so in the bar they were making out? And then they said they were in his car, in Izzy's car, making out. So maybe Chris saw it in the bar and in the car, or just in the, I don't know. But okay, Chris is saying, yeah, it was painful to see. So contrast Stacy's reaction to Chris's. Now, I don't know Stacy's heart. Maybe she doesn't care. But when Stacy found out that Izzy and Johnie were making out, Stacy was like, I don't care. And there seemed to be a little bit of uncertainty there in her voice. But, you know, again, I don't know her heart. Maybe she literally just didn't care. There's a lot of different ways that people will react in situations like that. But just want to highlight as a way to try to, I'm trying to talk so that everyone can have good tools as to things that they can use to evaluate personality, or the beginnings of it. I mean, obviously not in a clinical sense, but in a layperson sense, because it's very helpful, I'll tell you, just from personal experience, not only clinically, of course, but in my personal life. There's been a lot of benefits to me being able to at least have some of the tools to look at friends and family and coworkers and know, not so that I would know, but I would have an idea. Because what we're trying to do when we're looking at personality, both clinically and I would argue in our personal lives, is we're trying to predict the future. And that's what personality and theory of personality and research and different tests of personality like the MMPI are trying to do. That's what you're trying to figure out. I mean, sometimes they're used to try to assess past behavior like a crime or something, but typically we're trying to figure out why someone did something in the past, like why did my partner cheat on me? Having these tools can be helpful, but often we're trying to predict the future. Should I date this person? Should I marry this person? Should I find another job? Should I work with this person? Should I hire this person? You know, that kind of thing. And so that's why I'm saying this. Also, a lot of the tools and lingo online, in fact, I would argue 99.999% of it is scientifically dubious at best, if not just complete false information. All the tests that are popular, like the Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, they're fine, but they're not the tests that we use in psychology, because in psychology we use scientifically rigorous testing, like the Big Five or MMPI or the MCMI or the PAI. You know, there's various different instruments that we use for personality, and they are rigorously tested by thousands upon thousands of organizations coming at it from different angles for decades. MMPI, for example, I think it's been tested tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times, not just administered. It's probably been administered billions of times, but it's been researched many, many times since the 40s or 50s, since it was developed. So there's a lot of data, whereas these other instruments have also been tested, but have been found not to be good predictors of the future, or they don't have coherent categories or groups. So because personality is pretty complicated. But anyway, so I just want to say that because I would imagine that a lot of you actually might want this kind of information and either pick it up from what I'm saying or I don't know. Anyway, so what I'm saying right now is one way to delineate between one type of personality versus another. And this doesn't necessarily point to a typology. It's just something that you can look for in personality to predict the future. So with Stacy, when they bring up this issue of Izzy and Johnie getting together, with Stacy's like, I don't care. And maybe she doesn't, because I don't know. But it could be saying something. Chris, on the other hand, says it hurts. So because they're both in the same position. both of them dumped their person, and the person they dumped are getting together. So you could argue that for Chris, he is just saying that because he wants to say something nice about Johnie. Because Chris thinks, well, if I say, Chris is thinking, I don't really care. But if I say I don't really care, then that might actually hurt Johnie, because Johnie would think that's evidence that I never cared about her. So I'll say that it hurt. Even if it was just that indicates that Chris is thinking about Johnny's feelings, and or he's aware of his own feelings. So it's one or both of those things. Whereas for Stacy, she didn't have any reaction to it. And that's pretty consistent with other things that we've seen, especially when she's in tough girl mode, which is likely what she's presenting as right now. And so I'm not saying that Stacy doesn't have empathy. In fact, I know that she does, because we saw it in the season, and it was facilitated by Izzy's way with her. The way that Izzy was with her, it brought that out in her, and she said as much, and he did too. So that's underneath a very tough shell, but the tough shell is there potentially, and will likely be there in the future unless she really works on or works to alter it. So if you're trying to assess someone in your life along these lines, that is something to look for. And our culture is backwards, because a lot of people will look at Chris as being weak, and they'll look at Stacy as being a strong woman. And maybe that's true in a lot of ways. Well, that Stacy's a strong woman, but Chris is not a weak person. Other than the fact that he cheated and he ghosted Johnie, you could argue that is definitely a weakness, right? And could point to a weakness that he is being honest about. Anyway, so our culture is backward in that they'll look at Stacy and say, because people will look at someone like Chris and say, well, it shouldn't have bothered you because you broke up with her. What's wrong with you? Why did you break up with her if it would have bothered you to see her making out with someone? And that just denies human reality, right? Because we just generally want to suppress emotion in our culture. So I hope that demonstrates what I was saying. Okay, well, I want to tell you that if you are trying to get a hold of me, the best way is to go to the website and click on the Contact Us page, and then there's a form there that you can fill out. That's the best way to contact me. Also, if you want me to read your comments, one of the best ways is to have your comments voted up, but also because I don't look at every comment, I tend to look at the top comments. And I also will almost always look at comments of YouTube members. So even if you have no upvotes, if you are a YouTube member, I almost always see those comments. Not always, but I tend to, I can do a little search for member comments, and then I will see those. Also, if you want me to read your emails on the podcast, a really good way is if you are a patron, especially if you're an upper tier patron, because I just usually start from there and get to as many as I can. So that's another detail if you're interested. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.